What's up, everyone? Hope you're all doing well. In this video, I wanted to show how I would edit an image only using Lightroom. I know in my last video, I started off in Lightroom, and it was a very quick process because I usually just flatten the image out, and then I'll take it over to Photoshop to complete the image and add in contrast, light, and all that kind of stuff. So today's video is just going to be Lightroom only. So let's get started. So this image was shot in the UK at a place called Chapman's Pool, located on the Dorset coast. I'm just going to reset my panel there so it's back to the way it was, because I think I used that one for a blended image, because I have not finished this image, but I did it with Photoshop. So I'll just reset my panel so it's back to the original raw. It's a very dark, underexposed image. I shot this with my Nikon D810. So it's a very good sensor on that camera, and it's really good dynamic range. So there is going to be a bit of noise probably in this image, but I'll fix that with the luminance noise reduction. And I'll add a bit more sharpness into it. Well, it's shot at f11, so actually sharpness should be fine, but we'll see. So first off, I want to bring up my exposure, bring up my shadows and my blacks. I don't want to make sure I'm not clipping at all. I'm also going to bring down my highlights quite a ways. And a bit of my whites. Let's adjust these blacks again, make sure they're not clipping at all. It's looking a bit warm for my taste, so I'm going to bring down the temperature to about there, 5500. And the great thing about Lightroom is any adjustment you make, you can just come back and adjust it again. I'm going to bring up my tint. I'm just going to click on the number here to highlight it, and then just use my up and down key. Up and down key on my keyboard. I don't think I want too much magenta. I'll say +4 is fine. But that, what else? I'm going to raise up my exposure just a little bit more. Brighten up this middle bit. Add some vibrance. I like to use vibrance mostly over saturation. Saturation will just saturate all the colors. Vibrance will saturate the less saturated colors, so it's not as intense as the saturation slider. But I will throw a little bit of saturation in there. Maybe that's too much. Let's just go down to something like that. Should be fine. I'm going to do capture sharpening like I always do. So radius down to 0.5, detail all the way up to 100. And this is a pretty sharp image. So I'm not going to add any more sharpening, but I am going to mask out that sharpening by holding Alt and then sliding my masking slider across to the right, because I don't want that sharpening to be in the sky and really the dark areas, because that will just add more noise to the image. I'm going to remove chromatic aberration. And I'm going to enable profile corrections. And I think that's it for that. So what I first want to start doing, and I see that I got lens flare, and I'm going to try and take that out. Usually I will do that in Photoshop, but I'll give it a go here in Lightroom. See if I can accomplish that. I want to start by darkening down my sky. I'm going to just zoom out a little bit. So, because the way I do it is I use a radial filter and I drag it out quite far and then bring it down. And I'll bring down my exposure, and that's affecting the inside of my radial filter. I want it to affect the outside. So I'm going to press the uncheck the invert button. So that's just happening in the sky there. And I am getting a bit of the vignette coming in here, but that's okay. I like that. I can always get rid of it if I want to. And I think that's looking good. I want to soften my horizon up here, or where the sun is. And a technique I like to do or use is getting another radial filter. I just want that soft glowy look over on the horizon. I take down my clarity and add some negative dehaze, and then bring some warmth back into it. And it just gives it a nice glowy effect and softens up the horizon there and the edges of these hills and cliffs here. Add a little bit of magenta into that too. I also want to give it a bit more of effect on the sun, a bit more of that glow. So I'm going to use my brush tool. I'm going to, once again, take down my dehaze and my clarity a bit, add in some warmth, maybe a tad, a little bit of exposure. Just click once, make my brush a little bigger. See about there, click again. And it just gives it that little bit of a glow effect coming from the sun. I'm finding my sky still a bit too bright. I find it's distracting, so I'm going to bring down a graduated filter. Pretty feathered. Make sure my effects are all zeroed out. Bring down the exposure on that. Maybe add a little bit of warmth to it, just because the sun's here, it's underneath, it's shining through. I don't want it to be too blue up there. And I'm also going to add some whites back into it. Like that. I want to brighten up the foreground quite a bit. I'm finding it a bit dark, so I'm going to use a pretty feathered graduated filter to do that. Zero out my effects once again by double clicking on the effects button, and then brighten that up. And then I'm going to put another one just at the bottom here. I know it's kind of counterintuitive, but it's the way I like to do it. Oh, looks good. I'm also finding this part of this rock here too dark for my liking. So I want to brighten that up a bit. I'm going to choose a brush, zero out my effects. I'm just going to add some, see what the shadows do by raising that up a little bit. That's probably a bit too strong. Let's bring it up a little bit. Maybe bring up my blacks a bit too. Something like that. I think looks good. So now I want to do some dodging and burning to kind of pick up the highlights in the grass here. You know, the sun's shining through. I feel like these highlights could be boosted a little bit. So I'm going to use the brush tool. What happened? Oh, let me go back. I had that chosen and okay, that's fine. So I'm going to go new brush tool. Zero out my effects. And I just want the sun to come in these highlighted areas here. I'm going to use a little bit of clarity. I'm not a huge fan of clarity, but when it's just in a local adjustment, it's not everywhere, it can look good. I'm going to add a bit of warmth. Maybe not. Just a tiny bit of warmth. A little bit of exposure. I'm going down to my range mask. I want to bring that contrast back in that I've lost by adding exposure into that. I want to show the mask. And as you can see, it's just like a luminosity mask. So whatever's black, the adjustment won't affect it at all. And whatever's white, there will be more effect from the adjustment. But because I've used a brush, this red area is showing me the everywhere that I've brushed is going to be affected by the adjustments I've made, which I don't particularly want. I just want it to be on the highlights of the grass area. So I'm going to bring this slider down to the right, and that will adjust my mask for me. So that contrast will still be in the darker areas of the grass there. So let's see how that is. So it's not a big adjustment, especially when you play with the mask like that, but then you can always just go in and add more exposure to make that adjustment pop a little bit more, like the way it was before I used the luminance mask. Maybe just a little bit more warmth and a little bit more clarity, and I think that's fine like that. I also want to dodge a bit of brightness into the trees down here below the cliff that I was standing on. So I'm just going to do the same thing. A little bit of exposure. And a little bit of whites. A little bit of temperature increase. We'll see how this looks. I mean, obviously it doesn't look the best right now. Make sure I get down here. I don't think I got down there in my last one. It doesn't look the best right now, but once again, I'm going down to range mask, and I'm going to make sure my show luminance mask is clicked to around there. I think it should be fine. Let's zoom in, see what that's done. So you can see it's just added a bit of brightness to the highlights of those trees down there. That looks good. Maybe we can add something to these rocks here too. So I'm going to do that on a new brush. I don't want it to be as bright. Zero out those effects. Add a little bit of exposure, some warmth, and then just brush that on. Just a little bit of dodging. Maybe get these flowers here to brighten up a little bit. Maybe this edge right here too. These leaves here could use with a bit of dodging. And I think the image is looking quite good. I also want to add a bit of more brightness in this area just to make it a little easier for the eye to flow through the image. So new brush, double tap effect, zero that out. And I'm just going to use a little bit of exposure. Maybe a bit of warmth. Let's see what that does. Once again, I'm going to go to luminance mask and take it out of the darker areas. Show luminance mask. Just mask it out, those darker areas. I'm even going to take it out of the highlights, the widest whites. So that's how it looks if I didn't take it out of the widest whites, and you can see that it's the adjustment is really affecting that water. And if I just bring that right slider down, then it takes it out of those, so it won't affect the highlights here in the water. See what this looks like. Okay, I think that's good. I'm going to add another vignette just to darken down the edges a little bit more. And zoom out, make a big vignette so it's nice and soft and gradual. Make sure I uncheck the invert button. I also want to soften it up, all the blacks in the image. I like my images to have a softer feeling to them. So I just grab my tone curve, the point down here, and just drag it up. To about 5, and I just bring down this midtones to about there. It just softens up all the darks in the image. And I think that is almost done. One last thing, obviously, I want to do is come in and remove some of these lens flares that are happening down here. Oh, let's get these ones out. And like I would do this in Photoshop. I find it a lot better to do in Photoshop. But for this, as I'm doing everything in Lightroom, I will use the Lightroom spot removal to do it. Feel like it's a bit too feathered, that brush. There we go. That's better. Well, that did a good job. See if we can get rid of these. Maybe this one? Is it going to be able to do it? Oh, it didn't do half bad. It would be better in Photoshop, but for this video, I think that looks pretty good. I think I'm going to call this image done. I like the way it's turned out. Let's see where we started. Usually you can just press the backslash key on your keyboard and it will show you where you started and where you ended up. But unfortunately mine doesn't seem to work. So I'm going to... That's where we began. The original image. Added a bit of exposure and then we'll see where we ended up. And I'm happy with that. I think it's a good looking image. Thanks everyone for watching the video. I hope you guys learned something from this. If you have any questions, please leave them down below in the comments section. I will make sure to get back to you and do my very best to answer your questions. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe, and I'll check you in the next one. Thanks very much, everyone.